Community Change is an organization that is building the power and capacity of low income persons, especially people of color, to change the policies and institutions impacting their lives. Now, throughout the past 5 decades, Community Change has focused its work on strengthening the field of community organizing. Sharing with us now and giving us more information about her organization, we are pleased to have the Chief of Programs and Community Change, Afua Atta-Mensah. And Afua, glad to have you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. And you're doing good work in the area of mobilizing. And when we talk about social justice, really a lot of that deals with galvanizing, mobilizing people towards change. And so, talk to us about your impact in the form of community organizing and the work that you're doing.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, Community Change for 50 years has placed its bet on deepening the ability of amazing grassroots community based organizations across the country to be able to do their job of organizing better. So, for example, we build and provide support to dynamic organizations in New York, like Community Voices Heard and Make the Road, helping them in some of their organizing efforts, helping with strategy for campaigns and policy and advocacy, both at the federal and state level, as well as helping to organize our own base on politically. So it's amazing work over the last 50 years, and clearly is a matter of urgency currently.
Yeah. When we talk about a matter of urgency currently, there are a lot of issues that are front and center that we're dealing with. I'll start with one right now, immigration, because we know that that's a hot button issue as we still are working to deal with those who are in this country and those seeking to enter into this country, but particularly those who are here. A lot of people still are facing problems, a lot of red tape, a lot of things to navigate through. And so I know for you, immigration services is a component that your organization's been tackling head on.
Yes, correct. For about 20 years now, Community Change has helped to form an amazing, or excuse me, committee of organizational partners across the country that culminate into the powerful entity of Firm, where we fight for just immigration reform at the national level and also provide assistance for local campaigns. Um, Listen, sadly, a just immigration system in America has evaded us for decades. And so the fight continues. And we think it's extremely important that immigrant brothers and sisters across this country have dignity, equity, a clear path to citizenship, and an understanding that this is their home, right? And they have made and helped to cultivate great states and cities in New York, but also across the nation. So immigration equity is one of our pillar issues that we deal with at Community Change.
And a lot of New Yorkers are really struggling with this issue of affordable housing. Finding affordable housing in a place such as New York, where rents are skyrocketing, we know that uh, development is going up, but then on the hearts and minds of so many people is, I just can't afford New York. How do you get into the game, if you will, to try to raise your voice and raise others? Because there's so many residents out there who really are needing some help, particularly with this eviction moratorium coming to an end as well.
No, thank you for that question. I mean, our organization is premised on this deep belief, right, that people joining together are powerful and can change and shift dynamics. And in the area of housing, particularly in a place like New York, the importance of people taking collective action is can't be overstated. Whether it's, as you said, the eviction moratorium, housing has always been an issue of great import in New York, with a strong housing movement that's worked for more than 30 years to have victories like in 2019 with the strengthening of the rent regulation laws. However, given the pandemic, right, it's exacerbated all of the things that we already know. That the issues of affordability, the scourge of hyper gentrifications across the state of New York, not just in New York City, have really kind of brought to a crescendo this crisis around being able to stay in communities, to be able to live in dignity. You know, I raise the issue of dignity with immigration, but there's a great thorough line here to housing. And the fact that housing is really the crux of stability for individuals and families, right? If you're concerned about housing, even if you're working, you're nervous. If you are in school, or if you have children who are in school, if housing is unstable, it leads to difficulties in learning. So housing is really the crux of how people are able to even be able to take roots in communities. And the idea of being pushed out of communities because of issues of affordability is frankly traumatizing, right? And brings violence to not just individuals and families, but whole communities. So at Community Change, we are committed, right, to helping to lead on policy issues, because I think we have to step back and understand that a lot of these different systems of violence, which they are, right, the lack of a viable and equitable immigration system, the lack of equitable and affordable housing, are choices that are made. And so what we seek to do is build power to reverse those choices, right? There are clear housing policies that can ease, if not reverse, this trend of hyper gentrification, reverse these trends of a lack of affordability, where across New York City, as you name, people are building sky rises for the ultra rich and the 1%. And I would argue that the wealthy have never had a hard time looking for an apartment, but most working families across New York have, right? But there's a choice that this building is for a population of folks who don't have a need, as opposed to dealing with the everyday New Yorkers who desperately do. We seek to change that.
And you've seen some victory in this area because through legislation and through advocacy and organizing. Share with us a little bit about how you get residents engaged in that process of getting residents engaged to really be able to raise their voice collectively to bring about the impact and the results that get change.
Right. This process that you speak of organizing and leadership development, it takes a long time, right? To be able to reverse these trends of being isolated and being alone and feeling guilty for maybe not having money, feeling a sense of guilt and shame for being housing unstable. So one of the most important things that Community Change does is lend support to organizations on the ground when they're building these base building strategies and these campaigns. And there's nothing sexy about it, but it's essential. It's that going door to door, speaking to your neighbor, being vulnerable and sharing your story of possible housing insecurity or food insecurity, right? And letting people know that they are not alone, and encouraging them to take collective action, and hoping that they have, or guiding them to places such as Community Change and Make the Road and Community Voices Heard and Northwest Bronx and so many other amazing organizations across the city and state who every day work to help people come together and take collective action. So I just start with the idea that it's a slow burn, right? This idea of taking collective action, when I think America, especially, there's this culture of individual, right? Like rugged individualism, as if that changes systems and structures. No, it's collective action. And to be able to push past some of the fear and stigma people have and the deep shame, right? That you, as if you are the worst thing or the worst thing that's happening to you, as opposed to an entire chapters of a life. So it's that type of bravery that we seek to find, right? Like an interest that folks want to do something different, and then trying to support this belief that is often, there's been centuries of degradation, particularly of Black and Brown communities, to tell us that we are supposed to live unequal in squalor. So really being able to fight against that narrative takes, frankly, long-term planning, humility, and a lot of hustle, and we seek to build upon that.
A lot of humility and a lot of hustle. When we talk about uh, residents, employment, housing, those are pretty big issues that you guys are dealing with. And when we talk about dealing with them, I mean really to the place of having a voice, getting people to get organized. And when you talk about community organizing, this is the way the social justice actually occurs. And this is the social justice show, right? Social justice has occurred through a lot of community organizing. Share with us the background to community organizing and the work that you do. Give us a little bit more in depth in terms of how you go about doing it on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. Well, it'd be helpful for me to just take a step back about how Community Change came into being, right? Like, we were founded in 1968. This is after the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, to really come and to be intentional about waging a battle against poverty, right, across the nation. And this builds on these centuries of organizing, both in the United States and globally, of individuals taking collective action, right? And so part of what Community Change does is not just the individual organizing that we talked about earlier, about the going door to door, engaging people, having them talk to their neighbors, teaching those individuals how to have those conversations and build action plans and meetings and leadership development, but also to do the large scale strategy that has to happen, right? There's a connective tissue to these issues that we're talking about, of immigration, of housing, dare I say, a larger economic justice agenda, right? And a equity agenda. So part of what we also do is help to connect not just organizations, but individuals in coming together with an agenda, with a strategy and a plan of how we have a coordinated efforts, right, to change policy, right, through legislation, but also to change narratives through storytelling, all right, through demystifying some of these issues that so many Americans are facing, but don't talk about. So that's part of, right, like a campaign strategy and frankly, a long-term view of how to make structural change. And that's part of what community change lends as part of this larger movement.
And so, how do people get connected to the work that goes on, and how do people wrap around your services?
Oh, thank you for asking. So they can definitely come to Community Change's website online, where we have a host of activities that people can choose to engage in, either in our economic justice, racial justice, immigrant justice work. We also, of course, build power with our partners across the nation. So if we've once coming online and giving information, we can also help people connect with grassroots organizations in their very own neighborhoods where they can take action.
Yeah. Income support is huge, right? And I think that people are looking to get a better way of life, better cost of living. How do we go about raising the bar there, raising the awareness there? I know there are policies and initiatives that you have that are really centered on that. So share a little bit more about the policies and what you got going.
Sure. Well, first I have to use this example of income support to just give a host of credit to amazing base building organizations across the country, like Community Voices Heard and others, because this idea of universal income support years ago was thought of as crazy, right? Like, what are you doing? And now this is common conversation that poverty is in fact a policy choice, and there are counters to that. And so we
Mhm.
see that we've had huge success. Um, Across the nation in the midst of this pandemic to be able to move forward the idea of the child tax credit, right? That is a form of income support where families received money, but many people, they said more than 60% of New Yorkers, right, received some type of benefit from either the child tax credit or the earned income tax credit. And through that, and it's not talked about enough, that initiative, which unfortunately sunset because of the bureaucracy in Washington, cut childhood poverty in half. Because what we know is that when working class, when low income people get money, they don't send it, to some offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. No, they go out and they buy clothes, they buy food, right? They may actually put a little bit in savings, they may prepay their rent or their mortgage. So this idea of a basic income that at one point was thought of as being uh, bringing in a welfare state, right? And all the misogynoir that went around this narrative of welfare queens as actually a policy initiative that allowed families across this country to better live in dignity, to buy food, to buy clothing for their kids, to save, right? To have that breath when you're not in that state of perpetual violence and trauma of not knowing when you're going to get another dollar. So this campaign that we are going to continue to wage and invite others to join us on this idea of a universal basic income that assures a quality standard of living for all people across this country is of a great importance. And if not now, when, right? We've seen in the midst of this pandemic that is going to be with us, sadly, for some time, that, what's happened with the economy locally and across the nation, the harm that this has done to businesses, we're going to need to think differently. And we believe deeply that this idea of a guaranteed income, of a basic income, is going to be critical to the war against poverty.
So for yourself, let's talk about you for a moment. You're very big on social justice and social advocacy. You spent a career really being an organizer and also being a voice. So for people who don't know Afia, tell us a little bit about it.
Oh, my calling and mission to this work is because I believe deeply that something else is possible. I come to this work with the belief of liberation for Black and Brown people in our lifetime. And the greatest thing that we can do is take collective action together. And so once I was able to come and understand organizing and seeing people who never believed that they mattered or have power, being able to do things from get a stop sign put in their street, all the way to being able to have determinative input into who the next president of the United States will be, has been transformative in my life. And so I am a New Yorker through and through. I'm blessed to live in the village of Harlem with my partner and two small kids. And so I feel blessed to be able to do this work and take care of my family with it.
Yeah. And as we look as a community, we recognize that our voices collective can really make a difference, right? And raising awareness. Are you, in the work that you're doing with boots on the ground, are you finding that more and more people are now taking that active approach of saying, listen, I want to be active, I want to make my voice heard. This can't go on anymore. We used to see apathy for a while, but it seems as though that there's this resurgence of activism and advocacy and really getting out there and saying, listen, enough is enough. We got to do better. We have to see better, and we're demanding results.
Yes, I think the crisis that is the COVID pandemic has created instability for people in ways that haven't previously been experienced, right? Like, if we're honest, everything got thrown for a little bit of a loop at best. And so it's forcing people to ask some really hard questions, right? I'd say there's a whole new conversation about childcare, which is a campaign that we're deeply involved in, because frankly, parents, but for the most part, women got thrown under the bus, right? When we're having to do two jobs in a more public way, right? On Zoom, people were watching kids coming in and going out and trying to do these things. So people have been shaken to their core. And I think are ready in a different way to try something different, to see something different, to say, it's got to be better what's going on now, so let's fight. And that is an opportunity that true organizers see, value, and move upon.
Yeah. What advice do you have for people who want to look at organizing or doing community organizing? We hear all across the city, you got the neighborhood watches, you got
Mhm.
tenant organizations. These are, grassroots organizations that are definitely difference makers. Everybody has to start on their own block. But for somebody that's been in it for a minute, talk to us about what are some of the things that maybe people can do to become better at the area of raising their voice individually as well as collectively.
Thank you for the question. Oh, my hopes and prayers for new organizers is that they take the craft seriously, right? This is There is art to it, but there is also science, and so devote yourself to the study of learning, of listening, of humbling yourself, of challenging yourself and others, of open accountability and agitation, and to get ready for a heck of a ride.
Yeah.
Don't give up.
Don't give up, right? I think that that's the thing, though, because when you have so much on the plate and you have so much that you're trying to accomplish, sometimes it is that uphill battle that you lose a lot of steam and you lose a lot of momentum on the way because you've been at it for a long time. But for yourself, who's been at it for a long time and seen the success, um, what's it like? Because there has to be a certain amount of stamina and a certain amount of patience that also comes with this. Because, let's just be honest. A lot of people want, when they want results, we want them overnight. We don't always get them overnight, but the
Right.
fact is, we have to hold out for a few minutes.
hmm You know what so one, it's okay to take breaks, right? As in everything, if this is a marathon, right? This is a long distance. These systems that we're fighting to take apart were not built overnight. The infrastructure that supports them, the narrative that makes people believe them, didn't happen in a blink of an eye, and they won't be torn down in a blink of an eye. And so it depends what your North goal is, right? If this is about really changing things for yourself and your family, or if you're clear about your self-interest, and what it means to you, you'll stay the course. Take breaks, do what you need. Organizing is not about martyrdom, it's about change and winning. And so you do what you need to do to be able to prep yourself for the long game.
Right. And for people who want to get connected to your organization, please, again, let's talk about how they can get connected to community change.
So please join us on our website at communitychange.org. And once you go on the website, you'll find ways to connect, and we will be able to connect folks with organizations in their neighborhood, as well as ways that you can take action with community change. For those who are on social media, I will urge you to follow us on Twitter and on Instagram, where we post things about how you can take action, either by calling your members of Congress or writing letters or other petitions and actions that you can take either virtually or in person. So please follow us and look us up online, and we can engage and move from there.
And before we go, share with me a little bit about the pandemic and how has it actually affected the work of an organizer? Obviously, when you can't really do as much as we used to do, but how's it affected?
Well, at first, listen, it was difficult to take the idea of right of movements in the street to online. But as conditions shift, so much the so much the must rather the tactics. But so now we're doing what a lot of organizations are doing hybrid, where we're still taking actions safely or safer in person, but also doing online activity, which allows people to enter where they feel comfortable, right? So people can enter how they feel comfortable, how they feel that they can make impact, because all of it is important.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us and being with us here today. And I know that you got some great work ahead, and want to thank you for the work that's doing in terms of raising your voice and using your organization to really be out there on the platform for so many people, whether it's income, whether it's unemployment, whatever. You've been out there. We want to thank you so much for being with us here on social justice.
Thank you so much. Always have time for justice, always have time for Bronx, and thank you so much for having me on today.
All righty, Afua Atta-Mensah, our guest here. Want to encourage you to stay with us. We do have more show. Watch us here on the Social Justice Forums. We'll be right back in a few.